what I want to know more than anything is, who is the character in this story? Who are you helping?
Really, I'd like to help as many people as possible. I think anyone and everyone is made for therapy and can benefit from it. But my real passion is working with women ages 20 to 45, really kind of in that millennial era, but also couples as well. So my passion is in the relationship aspect. So I love helping people build more effective relationships, learn skills to communicate effectively so that they can have the most meaningful relationships possible. But also making sure that they're building the most important relationship, which is the relationship with themselves.
What motivates you to be in that age range?
Yeah, well, I think part of it, my business partner and I, we went through grad school together, and we really recognized this need for support for young women that are entering into the professional world. And it's a very masculine dominated, employment and industry, and there's not enough support and encouragement, I feel like, for women to be themselves, to step into their feminine energy and to really use that as strengths, where in the past and even still currently people see that as a negative thing. So just really wanting to help these women in ways that my business partner and I both felt like we weren't supported throughout our journey so far in our careers.
So do you think the masculine part of what you said, does that come from the fact that the early pioneers of mental health were like Freud and Jung? Is that the reason why it's taken a while for women to come into this space?
Sure. I mean, to some degree, yes, absolutely. A lot of your researchers, your early pioneers were all male typically. You did have some female therapists and researchers that were involved, but really it was a male-dominated field for the longest time. Now it's actually predominantly female. I think there are a lot of different factors, but generally speaking, in the career world, usually the masculine traits of you've got to get it done, push through it, you're not worthwhile unless you're productive.
That's me.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really been the dominating culture. Everyone has masculine and feminine energy. It's just a matter of balancing that and finding the middle ground.
Is there a difference between therapy and psychoanalysis?
They're one and the same. They're just different forms, because when you talk about therapy, that is a very broad term. There are infinite amounts of theories that somebody can practice and operate under, and it's just about finding what really is authentic to the therapist and what they find to be most effective with working with clients. So I operate under what's called dialectical behavioral therapy, also known as DBT, and person-centered therapy. So those are really the two theories that I operate under just at a base level. And I start there, but with the person-centered approach, I really believe that everybody needs something unique in their treatment. And so I collaborate with my clients to find what the best and most effective approach will be. So it's a combination. But yeah, psychoanalytic, that's a major one and a big foundation of mental health.
So what particular challenges do the women in that age range, what do they face?
So a lot of different things. I mean, even from starting at the basic and the biggest thing of like pay differential. So we're not getting paid the same as men are for the same exact jobs. Even being listened to, having our voices heard, finding our power and creating empowerment within our career styles, that can be such a challenge in this masculine-dominated world.
So how do you work with a woman that says, I'm not getting paid the same? What do you do? It sounds something that I've heard Jordan Peterson talk about when he has a lot of women clients, and he says women are just not as aggressively negotiating as men, and that's as much of a problem as it is as the job they're doing. They're more agreeable.
Yes, absolutely. And women were trained to be agreeable. From the early ages of young childhood, we're taught to be good. You have to be a good girl. You have to be well behaved. You have to make everybody happy, focus on other people's needs, and we watch our mothers do the same thing in households. They're the ones kind of like the glue in the household, keeping things running smoothly and making sure everybody's happy. And while that's not true, across the board, it is generally the dominant type. But there's not this sense of how do you even negotiate. I know even as a therapist, that's not something that we were taught in grad school. You know, we are expected to do free labor as graduate interns and be okay with that. And then you get into a job and, you know, you're just happy to get hired and get a salary. But no one taught me, certainly, the art of negotiation and knowing that you can counteroffer.
So let's have a bit of fun. I am a woman that wants to negotiate a better contract. Give me a tip. Give me one thing I can do with my boss right now that can get me paid my worth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, if you're already in the job, I would say going to your boss and saying, this is my goal. I would like to reach this. Either it's through a promotion or it's a number that you're trying to get to. And just start by asking, you know, what can I do to reach that goal? So kind of put the ball back in their court and allow them to offer instruction and guidance on how to get there. And then you can meet those criteria and have this tangible, you know, backup saying, this is what I've done. You told me X, Y, and Z to get here. So now are we in a space to negotiate? So that's a first step, is just asking the question and being able to, you know, confidently say, I know that I'm worth more and I know that the work that I do is good. So how can I reach that next level?
So that's a great tip. I'm almost moved to say that I'm going to use that myself next time I go in and say, listen, I've got goals to meet. Yeah. I'm either going to meet them here or I'm going to meet them somewhere else.
Correct.
What's your choice to be?
Yes, absolutely. And right now, employment is hard. Employers are having a hard time finding quality talent and as well as keeping and maintaining quality talent. So really, employees have a leg to stand on with that in terms of negotiation and being able to ask for what they're worth. Because hiring, you know, a new person for the same role externally or even internally is going to be way more expensive than keeping quality talent who's already trained and not giving up on those training costs that it took to initially bring that person on.
Interesting. So when I got into the workforce years ago, this wasn't something that was talked about as much. And I find that talking about a work-life balance is something that is much more prevalent now than it was when I first came in. And there's almost a feminine quality to that discussion. Mm-hmm. How much of that is part of what you do when you work with women is to get that balance between the home and the work life?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge part. You know, oftentimes in life, most people experience some sort of imbalance between their personal and professional lives. And as my job as both a therapist and as a life coach, I help clients identify those imbalances and then create an action plan or a treatment plan to help them correct those imbalances and find real inner peace and harmony within all aspects of their lives.
That's fascinating. So give me a solid example of one manifestation of an imbalance between work and life. What does it look like in the real world?
I mean, just starting with boundaries of workplace. So you start off saying, okay, my job is 40 hours a week, and then next thing you know, all of these extra responsibilities are being added on. You're taking work home. You feel like you have to open up the laptop as soon as you just got home from your 8.5, 9-hour day, if not more, and you're inclined to do more work. And so it's now impeding on your life and your family life and all of that. And so oftentimes it's very insidious like that, where it just starts off of, just check my email this one day, it's fine. But once you start opening that gate, then it's easier to say, well, okay, now this becomes a daily habit versus just a once in a while type of thing.
So it's, traditionally before, women became as penetrated the workplace as much as they do now, you hear stories from 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and you find out stories like NASA. You find some mathematician that was sitting in a room that did all the coding for the moon landings, and it's a woman. It doesn't get... Women traditionally have always been expected to fulfill support roles. Mm-hmm. Here's the question I have. How much of that is actually an instinct and how much of it is a cultural programming?
I don't have the exact answer to that, but from my perspective, I think it is certainly a bit of both. But like I said, women are trained from an early age to fill those supporting roles, to focus on other people's needs. And we get labeled as bossy or as selfish if we, God forbid, put our own needs ahead of somebody else's. So there's a lot of stigma around that. And I think just the programming, like you said, that's compounding everything. And it's it's ingrained not only in women but men as well. So we've got a lot of work to do to rewire and reframe that perspective for everybody, not just women.
You know, whenever my wife and I go out to dinner or go out to a function, I get ready in 5 minutes, and we go through the same ritual, and it's a source of humor to me, is that I'll put on my clothes, she'll have got ready first, then I get ready, then she looks at me and she'll go and get ready in something else, and then she'll come to me and I get put into something else. And I've realized after 20 years of marriage is that women see that occasion as a team event, and a man's not, this man, I don't speak for men, I'm not thinking in those terms.
Sure.
Is this something that's programmed in my brain, or is it just that is that an instinct, or is it a programming?
Yeah, again, a little bit of both, but I would say the programming certainly takes over in that, because there aren't as many things that guys have to do to get ready. You know, you get your hair cut, you shave, you know, maybe slap on some cologne and put on an outfit, and there's not much more thought into that. Women, again, have been trained to be very meticulous about the way that they look, the way that they speak, the way they present themselves to the world. There are so many judgments. I mean, even as a blonde, I know from my experience that I get treated differently by some people just because I'm blonde, and the stereotypes that come with that. So, you know, we feel the pressure to put on this mask and to really do everything we can to control the way that people perceive us, which I don't think that same pressure applies to men in our world.
It's fascinating. I actually have some experience of this. I was never blonde, but about 15 years ago, I shaved my head.
Okay.
And everybody treated me differently. They treated me like I'd just been released from prison.
Interesting.
And there was I'd walk into a store or a gas station, and I could just imperceptibly recognize that people had they had a barrier that didn't exist when I walked in with, a tidy haircut like I have now. So
Sure.
I think I understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. Perception is a really strong thing, and that feeling that you had of it was like the energy in the room shifted, eyes in the back of your head, you can just feel the energy and the focus on you, and feel people's perceptions in a lot of way, which again, that's a perfect example of the way that we're influenced and conditioned to really put in more effort and attention to things like our style and our dress and our appearance.
That's fascinating. This is the question I would ask everybody. Physician, heal thyself. Are you in this industry because it has helped you personally? Did you feel a draw to this because of the life that you had? Or did you just wake up one day and say, listen, I want to be in mental health?
No, absolutely. And I think if you ask pretty much any therapist, they'll tell you that the way they started into the industry was they wanted to learn more about themselves. And, I experienced some childhood trauma and a lot of other things throughout my childhood and my early adult life. And, I also have a mentor in my life, my uncle, who is a practicing psychologist in North Carolina. So he was a big influence. And I loved the way that his brain works and the way he thinks about the world and the way he sees things. So that certainly encouraged me. But I really found my passion for mental health based off my own experience through therapy, because therapy truly saved my life. And there were times where I was struggling so badly from the trauma and the PTSD and the depression that came along with it that I felt like I was at my wit's end and so isolated. So after having that positive experience, actually several times, but especially after my biggest bout of therapy, I thought, wow, how incredibly cool is it to, for your job, help people heal and to hold a space and hold on to hope for them when they don't have it for themselves.
Whenever I read astrology, every single one of the characteristics I say, oh, that's me. Oh, that describes me. So when you're going through your training and your graduate and postgraduate work and you're looking at all of these elements of mental health, how many times do you look at that stuff and say, oh, that's me?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's very common. Same thing in the medical field. It's very often for people studying those fields to then say, oh, wait, this applies to me. But part of being a mental health therapist and through my graduate training is we were required to go to therapy ourselves for X amount of time. I surpassed that because I needed the extra support. But even now I'm in therapy because I believe every great therapist has their own great therapist. And what we do is so intimate and intense that if you don't learn how to wring out the sponge and you're not aware of your own blind spots and your own limits, it can be really quick to erode where you end up causing harm to a client. So they stress that from the beginning, that if you're going to do this work, you really need to be healthy and of sound mind in order to do good work and to do safe work in this industry.
How important is empathy and how important is compassion in the work that you do?
Oh, it's critical. Those are the two biggest foundations of therapy. Without empathy, without compassion, there's a great quote, I believe Brene Brown says it, that our ability to love and accept others is only limited by our ability to love and accept ourselves. And if we can't have self-compassion for ourselves, in general, but as clinicians especially, how are we supposed to extend compassion to other people? And so that's why that self-discovery and that work on yourself is so critical to the work that we do with others.
Boundaries are important. You've learned in your life through your journey how to place boundaries.
Sure.
Tell me how to place a boundary.
Oh, goodness. Well, it depends on the situation. Sorry to give that answer because that's our favorite answer in therapy as well. It depends. But, recognizing your own boundaries first is really critical, because at the end of the day, we don't have control over anybody else. We only have control over ourselves. And so if we can't identify the boundary ourselves, then it's going to be really difficult for us to place that with somebody. But the key to setting the boundary is recognizing, I had a client ask me this last week, like, why is it so hard for me to keep these boundaries? And I said, well, oftentimes when we set those boundaries, there's a part of us that's getting a need met from not having the boundary, or that's the way our brain perceives it. And so there's a little bit of, angst about setting that and keeping that, because oftentimes it feels like it's a consequence that we experience. So I say, for instance, like in situationships, if you're dating, let's say this woman's dating this guy and she wants more from the relationship, she wants the label, she wants to really be a part of this relationship, but he says, oh, I'm not ready for that. I want to, keep hanging out and being cool, but I don't want a relationship. And yet the actions say, well, I'm meeting your family, we're going out together, you're paying for things, we're going on vacation. Like those are all things that are qualities of a relationship. And so this woman is sitting here saying, well, I want to set this boundary and say, either we move forward and you commit to this relationship to the level in which I've committed, or I have to move on. But that's so much harder for the woman, because if she sets that boundary and says he can't give me what I want, then I have to walk away. And that hurts part of the heart of, this is something I really wanted for myself. And so recognizing that, we have to adjust our actions and behaviors based off the response, because we can't control the other person. So if they're not willing to meet our boundary, we're the ones that have to adjust. And that's where the real work and challenge comes in.
I actually heard this on a podcast that I was watching, that women control access to sex, men control access to relationships. Is that true in your experience?
That's a great question. Again, it depends. I think that there's probably more balance in that than people realize. I think those are certainly, that's typically how things are perceived. But I think that there's room for that to change and for people to become more of a partnership and a balance in life, rather than feeling like we are confined to these specific roles and responsibilities within a relationship. Yeah,
I personally feel like it's 50 years seems like a long time, but it's nothing in the development of a civilization. And we've got, I feel like it's a big Venn diagram where men and women are here and they're moving closer, and what we're all competing for is this health of the bit in the middle where we intersect.
Yes.
And so old ideas have to evolve. They can't, they have to change over time. And having, I worked in an insurance office in the 80s, and 99% of the men would get fired today on the first day if they behaved the way they did in that office.
Sure.
So we definitely have made progress. Do you think we've made progress?
Yeah, absolutely, we've made progress. There's no way to deny that. We have more rights today than we did, like you said, 50 years ago, even especially 100 years ago, and holding space for both. Being DBT that I am, so the premise of DBT is that two seemingly opposite things can be equally true and valid at the same time. So
DBT.
Yes, dialectical behavioral therapy. Yeah, so two seemingly opposite things can be equally and true and valid at the same time. So yes, we can have made progress, and that's great. And there's still room for progression and evolution in that process.
That's interesting. Time for a joke.
Okay.
How many therapists did change a light bulb?
Oh my gosh, I should know the answer to this joke. I forget the punchline. You're going to have to tell me.
Takes one, but the light bulb has got to want to change.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes. No, it's true. Yeah, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
That's right. Tell me about your process. So I come in and I'm in your age, I'm in the group, your target client, and I say, look, I've got problems.
Yeah.
I need some help. How do I engage with you? What's the process?
Yeah, absolutely. So my clients typically come from either my website, social media account, or my Psychology Today page, which is the major marketing website that therapists are, marketing themselves on. And so they would reach out either through a phone call or an email, and they'll give me a little bit of information. This is what's going on. This is what I'm searching for. Can you please give me a call back? So once I get that email or that initial call, we have a 15-minute free consultation where I gather a little bit more information about the client, some logistics, age, where they're located, what they're looking for, if they've been in treatment before. And so we just have a brief conversation for them to tell me, like, what's going on in your life? How can I help you? Why are you seeking services? And then from there, we talk about logistics with pricing and figure out, a time to schedule that first session. And once we schedule that session, the intake is about 90 minutes, and they'll come in either virtually or in person, and I will ask a bunch of information. In therapy, we call it a biopsychosocial. So you're collecting all of this data, biological, social, all of this history in somebody's life. And so it can be kind of overwhelming at times because it's just, you're like scooping all your insights out and giving me kind of the big picture of your life pretty much start to finish. And so, so we gather that information, and based off of that, it helps me identify where we'll go next.
Tough question coming up. How often do you, and what causes you to say no?
A couple things. The biggest thing really is if somebody isn't within my scope of practice. So as a therapist, I've been trained to really make sure that I'm being honest with myself and with my clients about what I'm capable of handling and what I'm not. So for instance, do I work with kids? Yes. Is that my target population? No. And so if someone's coming to me saying, hey, my 12-year-old or my 7-year-old really needs therapy, can you provide that? Well, I could say yes, because technically I am able to provide those services, but I don't specialize in kid or child therapy, play therapy, whereas there are so many other clinicians who would be better suited. So that's just one example, but if their diagnosis is more out of my wheelhouse, or if I think that based off this conversation they might need a higher level of care, then those would be the two biggest reasons why I would direct someone somewhere else.
Have you seen the movie As Good As It Gets?
I have not.
Oh, you must watch it.
Okay. So
Jack Nicholson has a psychologist. He's in New York. He's famous, but it's almost like a cliche. The successful guy that keeps going into and they won't let him in, and they keep drawing boundaries, saying, "Listen, you've got to book an appointment. You can't come in here. I'm not just available." But he's so rich that he just goes in and says, "I demand your time." So we're back to boundaries. Mm-hmm. You're an empathetic and a compassionate person, and you form a relationship with a client that's professional. How do you form a boundary?
Yeah, absolutely. Very carefully. Yeah, it's very, murky territory in the sense that, especially on a client's end, it can be confusing if the therapist isn't very clear about the boundaries and the structure and the purpose of therapy. That can get blurred easily because when we're in that therapy space, my clients are sharing some of their deepest, most intimate experiences and thoughts and feelings. And so that can be confused if the therapist isn't setting those clear boundaries. So it's very intentional, it's very structured, making sure that you go over all of those, very hard boundaries at the beginning. But a lot of it is, therapist instinct as well, because the boundaries that I have with one client might look a little different with another one based off of their diagnosis, what their challenges and issues are. So there's a lot of instinct that's involved with that.
Are we talking about trauma bonding?
No, not necessarily trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is typically when you've either been through trauma together or if you share the same kind of trauma and sharing that. So as a therapist, I will disclose some things, but typically, I'm certainly not talking about my traumas and my experiences with my clients to ensure that the relationship is truly focused on the client and never on me. But you know, you have to find that happy medium ground. It shows up similarly, or it could, because if you come to therapy for the first time and this is the first experience that you've had where there was a safe space for you to open up and somebody to share with that you trusted, that can be a very profound and sometimes confusing experience.
Yeah, I'm familiar with a model called the Joe Harry box. I don't know if you, the Joe Harry, they're two psychologists, one's called Joe, one's called Harry, and they have this X and Y axis, and they have 4 corners, and it's about building relationships, which is the more that I tell you about me, the more you tell me about you, the securer we both feel. So if we both tell each other nothing, we're secure. If I tell you more than you tell me, somebody's insecure. If you tell me, etc. So the happiest place to be is where we tell each other nothing or we tell each other everything. And that's a straight line up then. And I just wonder whether or not that's a challenge as a therapist, because ultimately you're trying to empathize without giving information about yourself.
Absolutely. So one thing we like to say in therapy is it's about the process, not the content. So I use that as a frame of reference because, there's this human instinct where if somebody comes in and they shared a very similar experience that I've had in my life, I have to be very mindful not to let that part of myself take over and make sure I stay in my clinical brain and space. And so there are ways to show that you can relate to that or empathize with that without having to disclose personal information and specific content. You can talk about the themes or the lessons, and you don't have to say that it's, from my experience. Because again, you don't want to become the focus of therapy as the clinician. You want that to stay on the client. So I appreciate that it feels dichotomous where it's either an all or nothing, but in true therapy fashion, I believe everything falls on a spectrum. So it's really about finding that sweet spot in the middle.
So when somebody has a demonstrable need for your service and they don't do something about the problems that they have, what does their future look like?
Not to be depressing, but pretty bleak, the toll that mental health, when it's untreated, undiagnosed, and not looked after, can be really devastating. It impacts relationships, employment, your financial status. All of those things can be impacted by poor mental health. And so it can be very insidious, or it can be very quick of a decline, but it's certainly going to happen at some rate.
And do people that suffer mental health challenges, is it a slow burn towards a personal catastrophe, or do they go off cliffs?
It depends on the person, because everybody's mental illness manifests differently. I say this too. I work with a lot of depression, anxiety, and trauma and self-esteem issues. And while my clients all come in and they typically have a common thread throughout those different issues, their experiences, the way they think about them, are so unique to their own life experiences. So there are some common threads, but it's not one across the board. So for somebody, it could be a very quick snap, or a psychotic break could happen. I've had a client where he was very high functioning and was going to school on a basketball scholarship, and then had a psychotic break after his freshman year, and life went downhill very quickly for him because it wasn't treated. So it just depends on the person and their journey.
When do you make the decision as a clinician? When do you make the decision that somebody has breached has crossed the line of a therapeutic treatment and is now needing a psychiatric treatment?
So a few things. It really depends on their functioning, because you could have similar symptoms and have different reactions to those. So it really is about the well-being of the client, and again, is a lot of instinct of just noticing, is this causing distress in their lives? Is this causing impairment to their functioning? Those are really the biggest indicators that I'll look for as a clinician in assessing that, and to see if somebody needs a higher level of care. And it's based off of their functioning and how they're doing.
So I guess this is the real the litmus test of any profession. What does a transformation look like?
Yeah. again, it can look like a lot of different things, but from my experience, both personally and professionally, watching my clients go through that, transformation, it's a beautiful process regardless. It looks different for everybody, but I believe that there's beauty in all transformation. Even the decision just to go to therapy is a transformation in itself, and I think should be celebrated, because if we don't celebrate the small victories, we're likely to miss the big ones. So transformation could be as small as that, making that first step into treatment. But it also looks like finding inner peace, finding balance within yourself, getting to know yourself. We are so bombarded with so many messages in this world of who we should be or how we should look and behave and think and do, but who really knows what it's like to be themselves and to know who they are at their core root. If you took all of your life circumstances away and you stripped it down just to who you are as a human being, like if you lost everything today, who would you be? And I don't think enough people can answer that question.
So how many times do you get a call or an email saying, I did it, I demanded a raise?
Yeah, great. No, it's great. Yeah, I mean, it's so great when clients will, come back with that feedback and share their successes, and just seeing the light in their eyes, it becomes brighter, and recognizing that I had this in me all along. My role as the therapist, I'm not here to give advice and to give you the solution to your problems. I'm here to guide you through the process of figuring it out for yourself. Because I believe everybody has the tools they need to succeed. They just might not know where to start or how to tap into those tools.
That's interesting, because somebody once said to me, even the President of the United States has advisors.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's an investment in yourself. Therapists, we're a third-party, unbiased sounding board, and everybody needs that. I don't care who you are, and whether or not you're open to it, that's a different story. But I certainly believe that everybody could benefit from having that.
Success in a transformation is about the development and practice of habits.
Yes.
How important is it?
So important. It's so, so critically important. People come in and they think that, okay, let me just vent and that's that and now I'm cured. No, it's about doing the work outside of the therapy room. Typically in an outpatient setting like I work in, I see my clients one time a week for 50 minutes. That's it. How many other hours, minutes, seconds are there in the rest of their week where they're not in session, right? It's infinitely times more, right? And so that's where the real work is happening. We're doing real work in the session, of course, but the action piece, we're building awareness, we're thinking about things, but the doing part, the changing of the behavior, that's going to be done in their day-to-day life. So that's really where that heavy lifting is done.
So this is really a very, it's almost a spiritual question. I think it was Michelangelo who talked about David, and when they said this great sculpture that he did, he said it was in there all the time. I just removed the debris. How much of the transformation in your clients is the creation of an avatar or the removal of the debris? How much? What is?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both for sure, because we're conditioned. We come up with these things called unconscious narratives, and so they're messages and things that we tell ourselves on a daily basis that we might not even be aware of. And so that's really guiding our lives. So, when we come into therapy, we're evaluating those thoughts, those beliefs, the way that we think about things, the way we perceive things. And so there is a lot of debris removing, because we've been conditioned with unhealthy or maladaptive thoughts and beliefs about ourselves and about the world around us. And so it's really about reframing and coming up with a new way to perceive the world, or not even a new way, but just a little bit of a different way. We're still ourselves, but finding ways that are more effective to our functioning and our well-being, as well as the people that we interact with.
This is really interesting, because the unconscious narrative, I'm going to remember that. It's really, for decades, I've had this thing that I call the evil narrator. And how it manifests is that I say, what happens to me over 24 hours, that one day I can be walking down the street and catch myself in a window and say, you look really good today, you're doing it. And then the next day I'm like, 20 pounds overweight, you're getting fat, you're losing your hair, nobody likes you.
Yeah.
What can happen in 24 hours?
Infinite amount of things. You could run into somebody who made a comment, or you could come across something on social media and see people that are twice as thin as you are, and then the self-doubt creeps in. So it really could be a plethora of things, but it really comes down to what kind of narratives and self-talk do I have in my head, because the words that we say, even the ones that we don't say out loud, just have the thoughts in our heads, those create our reality, and they create a path for us, and whether that path is a healthy one or an unhealthy one, it all boils down to the things that we're telling ourselves.
I personally believe I suffer from a little bit of what I call imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that when somebody mentioned it, I said, that's me.
Yes.
That's me. What is that?
Yeah. So imposter syndrome is when somebody is experiencing kind of this outer body experience where they feel like they're going to be found out, and that they're not actually as professional or put together or as confident as they seem.
That's me.
Yes. Well, and you're not alone. Most people experience imposter syndrome at any given point in some area of their lives, and whether that's in a new job or in a new relationship, whatever it is, it can manifest in a lot of different ways. But I not that it's truly the human condition, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's on that level.
Okay, so I want some free therapy. Give me one thing I can do to combat imposter syndrome. Go. Self-talk.
So Mel Robbins has this great habit called the high five habit, and it basically says every morning when you're getting ready in the mirror, you give yourself a high five. And it seems really simple and silly. Even her husband was like, what the heck is this? This is nonsense. But it's very powerful and very effective, because that's the first thing you see in the morning. And if you're not having positive thoughts about yourself, then the idea that somebody else could have positive thoughts about you is going to be really hard to wrap your brain around. So we have to start off the day with giving ourselves a pep talk, having the confidence, and loving yourself no matter the outcome. One of my favorite affirmations is, I love and accept myself with all of my problems and all of my limitations. And that has really transformed my life. I learned that phrase in grad school, and it really helps me during times of imposter syndrome, because I know that I'm out here doing the best that I can, and we all start somewhere, and mistakes are a part of life. And if our mental health can't tolerate that, we're in a world of trouble, because that's where the learning happens, is learning from our mistakes and using that to move forward.
I definitely experience that if I get up in the morning and I'm late, or I split my toe on the corner of the bed, and I squeak the toothpaste on the floor, and dog's done something he shouldn't have done in the house, I go out, and then for the first hour when I'm driving, there's just idiots everywhere.
Yes.
If sliding doors, different, everything goes well, I go out and everybody's nice. And I think the only thing that's different is me.
Yeah, and that's the perception piece, the way that we start our days, the habits, the routines that we're in, they all have critical impacts on the way that we view the world, the way we operate in the world. And so, yeah, our brains are really good at picking out the negative things, and so you're not alone with the snowballing thought of one thing goes wrong, and then next thing you know, it feels like everything's going wrong. That's where we have to really do that mental lifting and say, okay, just because this one bad thing or one inconvenient thing happened doesn't mean that the rest of my day is shot. That doesn't reflect my self-worth or my value. It just means that I'm human.
What's the next year look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited for this next year. I just turned 30 last week, and I'm in the 30 club. And a lot of my friends, colleagues that are, about to turn 30 or have just turned 30, they're all seeming to dread it. But I am just so excited, because it's a new decade. It's a new era for me. It's where I'm really stepping into my career as an entrepreneur. So I'm just really thrilled about all of the possibilities, because they're infinite. And that's the mindset that I want to keep going into this. So, I've got a lot of big plans. I'm in the process of writing a book. I am.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be on inner child healing, and it's going to be partly autobiographical, where I tell a bit about my story and the experiences that I've had. And then I'm going to provide a lot of psychoeducation around inner child work. What is it? Why is it important? How does it impact our adult lives and our relationships and everything in our world? And so I'm going to be providing therapy in the book to my younger selves. So I'm in the process of writing this in the hopes of helping people learn about inner child healing, but to see the transformation that's possible when we take that time to go back and essentially be the hero that we needed and didn't have when we were younger.
Will you promise to come back and let us review the book when you've done it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I can't wait. I'm so excited to be working on it, to be putting that out there, and to maximize my reach with helping people, because time is a limited resource, and I can do great work in one-on-one sessions with people, but the more material, the more information I can get out there, that's really where that widespread change and impact is going to happen. So I'm also working on putting together some groups. I ran a test run of a women's support group last month, and it was incredible. I had amazing feedback. The first week I had 4 women, and by the second week I had 10, and they were all creating these connections after the group and exchanging numbers and making plans, and it was just so lovely to see these women come together, and they're making my dream a reality, which is to help support women and support themselves, but to support others as well. So I'm really looking forward to bringing that back into play here. Actually, just after Labor Day, we're going to be starting it back up.
I've learned so much today. Unconscious narrative. I'm going to be thinking about it all the way home, and I just want to thank you for coming in today. It's been fun.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate it.